Hello, I'm Sydney Soderberg. Welcome to the 10th season of Summer Solstice at First Presbyterian Church, Salina, Kansas. This year we are talking about resilience, the ability to adapt when we are confronted by difficult times. In this first session, we will set the stage for this year's series by developing an understanding of resilience. We look forward to seeing you again on June 15th and 29th. More information can be found on the church website, www.fpcsalina.org. Joining me in this summer solstice effort are Martha Ray and our moderator, Paula Freed. And now, Paula.
Welcome to the 2022 Summer Solstice series. The decision to focus on resilience as this year's theme grew out of a desire to locate solid ground to stand upon when the grounds are shifting all around us. We can all make the list of the many challenges that are facing us right now. The ongoing presence of COVID-19 and its attendant losses, intense political polarization, concerns about the war in Ukraine, economic worries, and this week we add to the list the tragic shooting at the elementary school in Texas. It's easy to feel that we are facing problems that are too difficult for us to solve. And yet every day we have to get up and live our lives. How do we survive and even thrive in a time like this? Today, we are very fortunate to have three remarkable panelists with us to help us consider this question. They each bring considerable expertise and experience to this topic, and I am delighted to introduce them to you. Froma Walsh is Professor Emerita at the University of Chicago and co-founder and co-director of the Chicago Center for Family Health. She is recognized by her peers as the leading expert on family resilience, with extensive experience working with a wide range of adverse challenges involving trauma and loss, disruptive life events, and multi-stress conditions. Her research-informed family resilience framework has been applied worldwide in research, clinical practice, community-based services with at-risk youth, and vulnerable families. She has received numerous honors and awards for her distinguished contributions to the mental health field, and has authored many books and articles, including Strengthening Family Resilience, now in its third edition. She loves animals and has written about the role that pets play in fostering resilience, and she is a Chicago Cubs fan. Alan Edelman is a Jewish educator who has spent his career developing and expanding educational capacity for Jewish institutions and individuals. Alan is also known for his interest in interfaith and multicultural programming across the Kansas City area. He is a widely respected teacher and has served as a guest theologian in many churches, universities, and seminaries. He has served on many boards of directors for a wide array of nonprofit organizations, including the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, the Notre Dame de Sion School of Kansas City, and the Center for Practical Bioethics. He is also active in the pursuit of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Alan has had a lifelong love of music, but his greatest passion now is playing Saba to his adorable 3 grandchildren. And I have independently confirmed that they are adorable. Cynthia Campbell was the first woman lead pastor of First Presbyterian Church here in Salina, where she served for 7 years. And she is remembered here for her stimulating and thought-provoking sermons and as a gifted teacher and storyteller. She left Salina to move to McCormick Theological Seminary to become the longest-serving president there. Since retiring from that position, Cynthia has served as lead pastor at Highland Presbyterian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, before she retired again in 2020. She is a highly respected leader within the Presbyterian Church of the USA, serving on numerous task forces and committees. She loves 18th and 19th century choral and instrumental music and as an avid reader of mysteries, especially those by British female authors. So Froma, let's turn to you, and can you help us get started understanding this whole idea of resilience?
Yeah, sure. I might start by just saying a bit about how I got attracted to this notion of resilience. And I'll talk a bit about some of the misconceptions of it. And based on research that has been accumulating now over 3 decades, we have a pretty solid understanding of what it is and how we can go about making it stronger, that it isn't just something that we're born with. Some people have it and some people don't. I came into the mental health field and was very disturbed by the tendency to focus on deficits, on pathology, and very little attention to strengths or resources. And I thought, well, this is the field of mental health, but it might be called the field of mental illness. So I was very much always, as I was drawn to the field of family therapy and the systemic approach, to want to understand when individuals, whether they're children or adults, family members, when they're under stress, when they're facing a crisis, not everybody falters and fails. What do we have to learn from those who meet those challenges and in fact emerge stronger? So I was very interested. I for many years was working on so-called normal families by expanding that lens as well, to see that all families face life challenges and that we shouldn't hold some model of people that are problem-free, but really understand better what can we all learn from those that face their challenges and overcome them, not just to survive, but to go on and thrive. I have a few slides I'd like to share just to talk briefly about about some of the key elements in a resilience orientation to whether it's in mental health practice and community services, whether it's in spiritual communities. This has relevance, I think, for all of us, particularly in these highly challenging and tumultuous times. So I'm going to focus a bit on family resilience, and I'll say why. It's about the capacity to overcome life challenges, whether it's an individual, a family, a congregation. And how do we see that as more than coping? It's about adapting, and it's about the potential there is when we face those challenges. We develop new skills, we may develop innovative solutions, and that we experience positive growth. So how is it that we can encourage that in our own lives, with our loved ones, in our congregations as well? So from a relational perspective, a systemic perspective, it's about stronger bonds, becoming more resourceful, and able to flourish. Uh-oh, let me see here. There we go. I've been co-director at Chicago Center for Family Health for 30 years now. And we developed many programs of training and community services over that time, just to see how this concept of family resilience or individual resilience or community resilience can be applied. In situations of crisis, trauma, and loss, with the death of a loved one, or in disasters, in war, working with refugees, with disruptive family transitions like separation, divorce, migration, multi-stress conditions with chronic illness, disabilities, complex trauma, poverty and discrimination, pandemic, I mentioned wars and disasters. Also with mass shootings, how do we respond in a way that both acknowledges and attends to the deep and tragic losses that have been suffered, and at the same time help families and their communities to move forward. And finally, in programs for at-risk youth and positive development, working with vulnerable families in the community. So these are the many different applications that this idea of resilience has. But there are some misconceptions because, as one of my colleagues noticed, that we tend to use this word resilience now. There's resilience face cream. It's as though this is just some strength and whatever. But our society is very individually oriented, and we think about the rugged individual who's invulnerable and self-reliant. And actually, that can get in the way of resilience. Because first of all, human vulnerability is normal in adversity. You could say that distress is normal in abnormal circumstances. And it takes strength to acknowledge difficulties and feelings. Also, resilience is nurtured in relationships. And there's strength in mutual support and interdependence. Next is, I mentioned the resilience science that's really moved from looking at individual traits to looking at multi-level systemic processes. What does that mean? It means it's the interconnections and interactions of individuals and their families and their sociocultural world, their communities. And finally, we can build relational resilience. Another misconception of resilience is this idea you just bounce back. And again, that's kind of in the American ethos. For instance, with grief, with loss, whether it's in the pandemic or in these mass shootings or in war, people don't just bounce back. And it's a faulty notion to expect people to get over things, to find closure. That's really not what resilience is about. With loss and persistent multi-stress conditions, there's going to be suffering, there's going to be struggle and setbacks. Also, we have this idea of going back to normal. Well, I think we've learned one thing in this pandemic, that we may never go back to the normal that we knew and took for granted, and that we're going to need to construct a new normal. As some people say, maybe it's just new normal for now, because there's still so much uncertainty in the future ahead. So if I were to just say, what is resilience about? It's about struggling well as we face adversity, working through and learning from those challenges, revising, reorienting our hopes and dreams, and integrating that whole experience and our resilient response into the chapters of our life passage. So a family systems perspective is that when these crises occur, they affect all family members, their relationships and family functioning. In turn, how the family responds can support resilience for every member, for their bonds, and for the whole family as a unit. And third, that there are vital resources in communities and in cultural and spiritual resources. So how do we build them? We look in family networks for who can help. We look who can provide emotional, practical support. We look for inspiring stories of adversity and resilience in the ways that families and communities have handled other challenges in the past. And for family resilience, it's even more than what individuals can do. It's how we can help a family to pull together as a team. And that's how we strengthen family functioning, through how they share their beliefs and practices, how they collaborate and give mutual support. So just to wrap up, I developed over my work and my research and my practice to identify key processes in our relationships that can strengthen resilience. And a big one here, and I think the most important, is our belief systems, how we make meaning of the things that happen to us, that we can't control what happened to us, perhaps, but we can control our response, our active initiative, our investment in making things better. In a positive outlook, keeping hopeful or reviving hope when it is lost, and transcendent values and practices, particularly spirituality, that help us rise above a particular difficulty or traumatic experience, to see the human condition and to be able to rise in compassion toward others, to reach out in transforming ways that enrich our life and enrich other people's. I won't mention just today, but we also look at how families organize their daily life, and we look at their communication processes and how they can be strengthened. But in all of my work, I think most importantly is this meaning making and helping people find hope and transcendence through their life difficulties. So just to finalize, I think families provide shelter through the storms of life. They don't make the storms go away, but they hold each other steady through it, and they guide their passage ahead. I like that very much, in a way of thinking about holding and encouraging that happens in relationships. So that's what I had to say.
Thank you, Froma. What a beautiful image and beautiful words to send us on to our next presenter, Alan Edelman.
Thank you, Paula. One thing that Paula did not mention in her generous introduction is that I am a child of a Holocaust survivor. As a young girl in Hanover, Germany, my mother was thrown out of her school because she was a Jew. On Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, November 9th and 10th, 1938, her father, my grandfather, saw his factory burned to the ground. He was arrested and sent to Dachau, then only a detention camp. And I'm here because after the Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935, legalizing the persecution of Jews, my grandmother's three brothers realized that this would not bode well for the future. So they left Germany. And because they left before things became tragic for my mom's family, the Jewish population, and so many others, they were able to pay the Gestapo to release my grandfather and allow the entire family to leave Germany. But most of the world, including these United States, was closed to the Jews. Fortunately, they boarded the last ship to Cuba, where they spent 3 years before being sponsored by a family in Kansas City. My mother was always a source of inspiration to me because of her resilience, living in 3 different countries, speaking 3 different languages in the course of 5 years at a very impressionable and developmentally critical time in her life. As a lifelong Jewish educator, as well as someone deeply involved in interfaith work, I've often been asked, how has the Jewish people survived for millennia? One answer is that the capacity for resilience has been woven into the fabric of Judaism over thousands of years. Judaism's focus, both spiritual and practical, on helping people continue living in the face of challenges, pain, and tragedy has helped the Jewish people to survive. The American Psychological Association defines resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, and even significant sources of stress. And Harvard professor of psychology, George Valiant, suggests that resilience can be understood as a twig with a fresh, green, living core that springs back and continues to grow after encountering pressure. Judaism writ large is about resilience. Throughout our history, Jews have experienced extensive trauma, even catastrophe, and we have survived as a religion and a people. After each catastrophe, the prevailing paradigm was inoperable. We no longer knew how to understand ourselves in relation to God, to other Jews, and to other peoples. And throughout our history, Jews have ultimately transcended catastrophe after catastrophe. We've repeatedly breathed new life into the Jewish people, and we have found pathways toward repair. From trauma, we have had to heal. We have had to recover and revision, regenerate and reseed vital Jewish life. We found ways to cultivate resilience, both individually and collectively. Jewish history is, in many ways, a recurring cycle of crisis and renewal. The Second Temple in Jerusalem, the center of religious life, was destroyed in 70 CE, and our ancient sages created Rabbinic Judaism, organized around synagogues and home observance. After Jews were persecuted and expelled during the Spanish Inquisition, Jewish mystics responded by building up Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition. In Eastern Europe, Hasidic Judaism, known for its tales and joyful chants, emerged in the aftermath of the Khmelnytsky massacres. Jewish emancipation, made possible because of Europe's Age of Enlightenment, brought many opportunities and also much confusion about identity and community, sparking tremendous cultural creativity, including Spinoza's philosophy, Marx's political theory, Freud's psychiatry, Durkheim's sociology, Einstein's physics, Schoenberg's compositions, and the birth of two of our progressive contemporary movements, Reform and Conservative Judaism. Emancipation, its opportunities, limitations, and crises also gave rise to Zionism, the Jewish nationalist movement, which ultimately created an independent Jewish state after nearly 2,000 years of homelessness. These are only a few examples of collective Jewish resilience after trauma. In Judaism, the collective from the individual is always difficult, since so often they are interdependent. Judaism has sustained the Jewish people because it sustains individuals. How many parents have buried children yet continue to work toward a better world? How many sons and daughters have seen their parents, their entire communities consumed by conflagration and persecution, and yet found the strength to rebuild? How many have seen their lives destroyed and found the will to start all over again? Our cultural capacity for renewal is built on a foundation of individual practices and encouraged and even commanded. From the Jewish morning prayer service, every day creation is renewed. If we open ourselves to this teaching, we can see that every day we have an opportunity to recommit ourselves to living out our values. The Talmud teaches that we should say 100 blessings a day. One could see this as a legalistic and somewhat oppressive, or we could see it as an invitation to engage in ongoing gratitude practice, to raise up the interconnectivity and abundance that gird our daily lives, even when our days are filled with challenge and loss. Jewish time is structured to end each week with Shabbat, the Sabbath, literally ceasing all activity, which can help us step out of the demands and preoccupations of the week and support us in refreshing both our bodies and our souls. And the holiday cycle of the Jewish year builds toward the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement, also known in Hebrew as the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, when we at once reset the clocks on the year and through the practice of repentance, reset the moral compass of our lives. 3 days a week, and on holy days, we read a section of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. After the reading is complete, we return the Torah to the scroll into the Holy Ark where it is stored. And the last line of the part of liturgy that we sing says, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva. Help us return to you, God, and we shall return. Chadesh yameinu kekedem, renew our lives as in days of old. This verse is a powerful demonstration of resilience encoded into Jewish life. In closing, Dr. John Grish has offered a recipe for resilience, which has 3 components. 1, self-regulation. 2, interpersonal relationships. And 3, meaning-making. He believes that one must manage one's emotions and actions, find support from others, and make something positive from the experience. When I first read this, I thought of Mindy Corporan, whose father and son were killed by a white supremacist anti-Semite at the Jewish Community Center in Overland Park, Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City, in April of 2014. She drew strength from her faith. She surrounded herself with people who loved her and felt her pain. And then together they created an annual week-long citywide event culminating on the anniversary of losing two people most dear to her. It is called 7 Days, Make a Ripple, Change the World. 7 Days seeks to overcome hate by promoting kindness and understanding through education and dialogue. Thousands have participated. And the last word goes to Sherry Mendel, who lost her son in a terrorist attack. She said, resilience is about becoming, not overcoming. I want to recognize the work of Rabbi Deborah Waxman, PhD and president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and Jewish Reconstructionist communities, much of which inspired my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. What so much to think about there about community and individual and the sustaining practices of Judaism. Thank you very much. Cynthia.
Thank you so much. And thank you to both of you. I feel like I've already learned and been reminded of some really important things in this conversation. And what I want to say, I think is maybe going to reiterate and possibly by way of illustration, some of the things that have the insights that have already been shared. When Paula and I talked earlier, she asked me kind of how I was entering this question of resilience just now. And I said that in fact, the way I'm thinking about resilience is for me right now pretty existential. I retired from the church I serve here in Louisville in August of 2020. So I went into retirement in the middle of COVID, which is a very strange experience, or at least it was a strange experience for me to go immediately from one life to a very different life. At the same time, my husband has experienced a number of health challenges, including some pretty significant surgeries, and now struggles with dementia. And so my life is now completely different than what I had anticipated it would have been. And so one of the things that has happened to me is building on a set of practices that I've been exploring for some years that come to in the Christian tradition out of the work of Saint Benedict and his rule and his foundation of monastic communities. His little rule, as he calls it, is a way of thinking about how to find a path to God in community with others and to order one's life on principles of simplicity, of a balance between work and prayer, always understanding hospitality as the core of community practice, and a commitment to finding God at all moments of the day, and in all things. So practice the presence of God. I've been drawn to this particular form of Christian practice for literally decades, but it has lately become the anchor that's grounding my life in really changed circumstances. And so I'm finding it deeply great. I'm deeply grateful for that opportunity. It involves things that, of course, I've done for years, reading the Psalms in particular, prayerful or meditative reading of scripture, some journaling, but a way to put the experiences that I'm having in a broader context and in inside of the presence of God journeying with me in this. The Benedictine style of Christian practice and spirituality is only one of dozens of ways that Christians have found themselves, I think, drawing on those resources. And it seems to me that not only Christians, but people of other faith and people really of not necessarily of faith at all, if they are resilient, they have found some path, they have found some set of practices that shape their life and help them discover and discern meaning in the midst of that, as Alan was expressing so beautifully through the way in which the Jewish construction of time has provided that framework of meaning for people for centuries, for millennia. So I've seen resilience, of course, in people, in dear friends of mine, down to the years, who have experienced trauma, some of it death. I think about people who, after losing a child, turned to a ministry of founding a grief support group in Salina that transformed the lives of scores of people in town. A tragedy that could have torn apart the family and a marriage morphed into something completely different and touched people for years. I think about my own father, who started off college at Bowdoin College in probably 1928, I think. He was going to be a classics major. The Depression cut short that ambition. He came back to Chicago, where he became an accountant, not his first choice. He later became profoundly deaf as a result of scarlet fever. He developed epilepsy, which eventually in much later life resolved itself. He remained an incredibly optimistic person who had a huge range of interests, in science, in music, in people. Bookkeeping was what he did. It wasn't who he was. And his legacy of keeping himself alive. A small anecdote, I happened to be home in California studying Greek for my seminary work, and my father decided that he wanted to know the difference between the Koine Greek of the New Testament and the Greek that he had been majoring in at Bowdoin. And of course, by the end of the summer, he knew more Greek than I did, but was a fascinating tutor along the way. I think we all know and are inspired by these struggles. It was not that my father did not have major challenges, but as I look back on it now, the way in which he was able to incorporate that into a full life is truly amazing. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is the way in which resilience does reside in communities, not just in individuals. I've been privileged here in Louisville to become partners with a number of white and Black clergy in this city who are working hard on bridging the racial divide that is very much a part of this city. We were actively working on this before Breonna Taylor, and because the problems here in Louisville are considerable and very old and very deep. I worked with a lot of Black pastors and students at McCormick theological seminary as well, but even more here, what I've come to see is the way in which the Black church, not unlike the Jewish tradition, the Black church is a way of being Christian that is built out of trauma and built around the practices of resilience. Some of those practices have to do with dressing up to go to church and wearing hats and looking really beautiful. Why? Because for many people in their other lives, they wear uniforms. They are not seen as individuals. They are not celebrated. And going to church is the place where you matter. It's why using titles is very important in the Black church tradition. I come out of a tradition where using first names is the way you establish relationship. In the Black tradition, using titles is a way you convey respect. And the power of that is something really worth admiring and understanding. But it is, I think, absolutely an expression of resilience that has been very powerful to me as I have participated around the edges of it, and is hopeful in the midst of all that there is to be so pessimistic about. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Cynthia. Those are beautiful examples that you've ended with about practices, and you've all touched on that. So that's where I'd like to start. And I want to circle back around to you. And first I want to say, I think the framework you use is so hopeful, and this is echoed through comments that both Alan and Cynthia made, but you see crisis as an opportunity for growth. And it seems that part of what makes it possible for people to grow through a crisis has to do with practices, among other things. And you've mentioned that it's not really about traits. It's not that some people are just lucky to be born more resilient, although we do know there are individual differences in that way. But there are practices that we can create. Can you talk some about that? And Alan mentioned gratitude, for example. Do you see that as an important part of a resilience framework?
Oh, absolutely. Some people are born with more resources, and I'd like to just with the other speakers, we have to acknowledge that some people are more vulnerable, not because they lack resilience, but because the obstacles that they face in their lives are overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so I like very much this idea of becoming, but it often does include having to overcome barriers that allow you to succeed, to fulfill your best, to bring out your best. I also like the idea of making something good out of the bad things that have happened. Again, it's about active agency of, I like very much, there was a researcher who talked about the subjects that she interviewed who had all kinds of traumatic experiences through childhood, and yet came to adulthood able to thrive and move on. And she called them masters of the art of the possible, about their active agency in, first of all, grappling with, what meaning can I make of what has happened, but also what can I make of what can be, that I don't even know what it is yet, and that's where you grow stronger through your efforts to make a life in the wake of tragedy. And I think, Alan, the experience of the Jewish people, over millennia, it is all about that. And in our own families, in my family as well. I grew up first of all, I was told I was very resilient once this resilience word got out there. And I had had therapy where it was a matter of pulling out every failing and disappointment I'd had in my childhood and family life, and seeing my parents in their deficits. And I think we tend to do much too much of that in our society, so that I was really blind to their strengths and resources, their resilience. And it was really when I could look at them, it's partly the eyes that we bring to see strengths and resilience, that I came to really marvel at what they had had to do, what they had had to overcome. And to have that spirit through the depression, through my mother lost her father very young and then lost her mother. She was alone in the depression. Things didn't work out. My parents really struggled financially. Our house burned down when I was young. People took us in. It was the community that supported us. When my father's business couldn't make it over the years, they reinvented their lives, going to a new community, starting over, always with this sense of, all right, well, we're going to do our best. And if it doesn't work out, we're going to try something new. And always keeping that sense of possibility in front of you. And I would not be the person I am today had I not grown up, as both of you did, in families where you not just witnessed, but you imbibed their spirit of resilience.
Thank you. Alan, I want to ask you a little bit more about the idea of practices as well. And you talked about in Judaism, we call those mitzvot. Why do you think that practice does make a difference? How does practice work exactly? Why does it help us?
Well, I think that most of the commandments that are contained in the Torah, and if we believe that they are God-given, either by inspiration or revelation, and that's everyone's choice, were designed to make a better life, to give us a better life. Moses, in his farewell speech in Deuteronomy, says, God has given you these commandments because God believes this will enhance your life. And I think anything and everything we can do to make the time that we spend here on earth meaningful, not only to us, but to all the people around us, because those moral and ethical commandments are just as important as the ritual ones, then that's going to, I think, help us become the kind of people we want to become and will help us in every situation. So I think of the tradition of Shiva after someone has died, the process of mourning, that most of us would want to just go into our bedrooms, close the door, and be left alone. And our tradition says, no. For the next 7 days, you're not going to worry about a thing. People are going to come into your house. They're going to bring all your food. You're going to say the prayer, the special Kaddish prayer for your loved one in your home. You're not going to have to come to synagogue, and we're going to create the quorum that's necessary to say that prayer. And you're just surrounded with so much love and people sharing the stories of the loved one that's passed away. So it's just another example of something not in the Torah, but that the rabbis, in keeping with the spirit of the Torah and the commandments there, felt would be the appropriate way to deal with mourning.
Thank you. Cynthia, talk some about your own practice of prayer and meditation and what has been so helpful to you, why that has been a resilient practice for you.
Yeah. So my practice is morning prayer every day. That includes I use resources that actually come out of St. John's Arch Abbey in Minnesota and their press there. It's a fairly simple process of reading in a prayerful way, the Psalms, centering myself in God's presence, acknowledging that I'm in a space with God, reading slowly and carefully. I've learned to read out loud, if you will, sort of sotto voce. The Up until the modern period, everyone understood that reading meant speaking. People didn't read with their eyes, they read with their voices. And what that does when you read a passage of scripture, really much of anything else, out loud, even if you do it very quietly, you're engaging your body, your breath, your lungs, your mouth. It's a physical activity. It's not just something that goes in the eye and to the brain. And I think that I've learned that over the years, that I think that's just a remarkable process. I've learned to pray in a way that is basically sitting in silence. I do far less of asking for things than simply being open. I will think about people, but I don't verbalize the prayer as much as I simply hold someone or something in my mind in God's presence. As a preacher, I love biblical study. I love reading about text. I love understanding the background of text, literary, historical. But this way of reading text is different. It is sitting with a passage and just letting it resonate, however it will resonate at the moment. So that's sort of the core of the practice. And trying to carry forward that sense of the holy into the rest of the day. Now, that doesn't always work particularly well, and so one comes back to it at other times during the day. And then if I can, I do a time of recollection in the evening. But it's being in a space that is conducive to quiet and reflection is also a very important kind of thing. You can't do this just anywhere. You need to have a place where you can feel at home and at peace.
Well, and you may have already indirectly answered this question, and maybe you don't, maybe this isn't even the right question to ask, but I'm wondering, do you have a thought about like the mechanism, like how these practices really do bring something to you that is so helpful when you go back into your daily life?
I think the only thing I can say is that they seem to me to be an anchor. That I need this anchor in my day. It's not unlike Alan's comment again about structuring time. That when the day begins with this kind of quiet and reflection, the day is different for me than when it doesn't. If I don't have this time, the day isn't the same for me anymore. This is as necessary. I used to read the paper all the way through with coffee in the morning. Now I pray with coffee. I have I can't deal with the paper till after I've grounded myself back in the presence of God. And I've also done retreats for years with a couple of different monastic communities. And so in the background of my mind, I have the sound, frankly, of doing this prayer in concert with monks and nuns, that men and women who do this as their vocation. So I'm doing it myself, but I understand myself to be part of a much larger community of people that are doing the same things every day.
Yeah, Paula, to your point, so much of prayer, certainly Jewish prayer, but I think all prayer is basically praising God, asking God for things, and then hopefully thanking God as well. And I end my prayer, my morning worship, I end by saying, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. Because then I take the prayer out to the street, to your point, and it's just not something that was between me and God. It's reminding me of my responsibility that prayer, that what God really wants from my prayer is for me to be, in fellowship with other human beings.
So both of you are making this direct connection between individual practice and feeling part of a larger community. And I know, Froma, that's a central idea in your work. Is there anything else you'd want to add there?
Well, I might like to join the conversation about spirituality in my own life, and also how I came to see it in relation to resilience. I see spirituality as a dimension of human spirit, of experience. It is more than religion, and it can be found and is the heart and soul of religion. But many people also find spiritual meaning and practice outside of formal affiliation or attendance in congregations. And I follow all the Pew religious studies that come out every week and every month. And so I'm very aware at how in our society and in European society, which is very secular, at one time I was teaching in Australia about resilience, and they said on the segment they said you can skip the segment on spirituality because we're just not religious here. And I said, okay, well, let's look for other words that kind of convey what do you think about, what words would you use to talk about deeper meaning or fulfillment or purpose in your life, and gratitude and kindness and compassion, all these things. And they said, well, we look for things in our life that provide nourishment. And so some people don't like the word spirituality at all, but this idea of what nourishes you. Some people don't like the word soul, spirit, maybe, but this sense of deep, genuine connection within yourself, and connectedness with other people, and connectedness with all life. And I guess that's a very indigenous, ancient, and Native American way of thinking about it. And I would say that's kind of close to the mechanism for me, is much more about deepening my internal connectedness, my connectedness with others. Being out in nature is very important. Every day, my way of connecting is I do a walking meditation every day out in nature. And I come back and I feel filled in a way that reading the paper in the morning doesn't do for me anymore. But I also came myself from a family where I had to put together and come to a multi-faith perspective. My mother grew up in a French Canadian Catholic family, and my father in an Ashkenazi Jewish family. So my mother converted, and because she was a gifted musician, she was the local piano teacher and an organist. She was the organist at our temple. And I, went through, all the steps and the stages. At the same time, there came a point when somebody said to my mother, well, you're not really a Jew, even though she'd converted. And there was something where my parents, they said, well, we're stepping back from organized religion, but the deeper spirituality within them always remained. And I think of that with many, particularly younger people, but people today that have, we say, fallen away from their religious affiliation, or they don't have the time and space in their lives to attend worship services or become involved. And yet they're looking for that meaning. They're looking for that deeper connection. And that's something that I think that deeper sense of spirituality can help them to find ways that bring that into their lives.
My favorite statistic is 90% of people believe in God and pray to God, but 30% affiliate with a synagogue, church. And so where's the disconnect here, folks?
Mhm.
Okay, so
But I guess going back to what both of you have said is that however that when we start to look at it in our research, because we have many stories, your own, mine, we call them anecdotes in the scientific area, meaning, oh, they're not as important as statistics, but life stories when you really talk to people about their lived experience. A woman who doesn't belong or go to a single parent raising her kids after the death or abandonment by her husband, you ask her, how does she get through each day to do as well as she does in holding down a job and raising her kids? And she'll say, I talk to God every day. But she might say, well, I'm not really religious, but I talk to God every day.
I think that the challenge, it seems to me, is that where we are in our society these days, on the one hand, people are finding ways to do this, to make meaning, to develop practices on their own. But this is so much, it seems to me, both easier and richer when one is connected in community with others, that the isolation, whether it's in one's spirituality or in one's social life, is is very dangerous and is finally debilitating. We draw strength from one another. We learn these practices from our elders or from others that are important to us, and we pass them on in turn.
So what you're saying too, this isolation and the loneliness and the lack of connection is contributing to very high rates of depression and suicide in our society.
Yeah, especially among the young.
Yeah.
It's every one of these young mass shooters, sooner or later, there's a story about isolation, maybe about trauma, maybe about bullying. There's something that of a disconnected and deeply, deeply broken spirit.
okay. Well, I want us to end coming back to the idea of meaning that all three of you have touched upon, and to pass on stories and ideas. I'm hoping that each of you will share with us what provides you with a sense of meaning in a time like this, or what might you offer to viewers as a potential sense of meaning as we move through these challenging times. And Alan, I'll start with you.
Sure. There's a term in Judaism which comes out of the Kabbalistic, the mystical tradition. It's called tikkun olam, repair of the world. And the theory, the idea developed when the mystics said, God is good, so why is there evil in the world? And the mystics came up with the scenario that when God was creating the world, that God sent God's energy down to earth in vessels. And that energy was so incredibly powerful that the vessels couldn't handle it, and they broke the vessels. And there are all these shards, and the shards represent, unfortunately, the potential for good or the potential for evil. And the mystics wanted each of us to know that our purpose in life was to find the shards that have the potential for good and put them back together. And only by doing good could that happen. So the responsibility falls on each of us to not complain about the evil, cry over the evil, as easy as that is, but to do something about it. I'll end with the famous saying by Rabbi Hillel of the first century: if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?
Thank you. Thank you. Cynthia.
So meaning in perhaps I come at that too intellectually, but there's in the Reformation, one of the catechisms or teaching documents that shapes my piece of the Christian tradition, the Reformed tradition, begins with the question, what is your only comfort in life and in death? And the answer is, my only comfort in life and in death is that I belong to God, not to myself, or not only to myself. I belong to the Creator, to the ground of being, to the one that holds all of reality together. So in life and in death, not just in life, but in all of what we experience, that I'm not on my own. We are not on our own. This mess that we're in is still inside of something with a larger purpose and an abiding compassion for everyone. And our job is to tap into that, to align ourselves with that vision and with that direction, and do precisely what Alan has talked about, do our part in the bringing of that compassion and healing into the world.
Thank you. Beautiful. Roma, bring us home.
I would just echo what both of you are saying, that, and it goes back to this, in tragedy, what can we do that can make a difference? If not for me, because I can't change what has happened, but so that others will not suffer, so that our communities, our other families, our society, our world will be a better place. And, you know, I think the danger is this division in our society and the sense of helplessness, that it's always been this way or it's worse, and others out there aren't making a difference. And I guess it gets back to this calling that all faiths bring, is to breathe out, to breathe in that in inspiration, and then bring it out in aspiring. Our daughter is an international humanitarian worker and recently went for a brief time to do a mental health needs assessment in Ukraine, and is just back from that. And she's worked in the toughest parts of the world, you know, the Middle East and Haiti. And there are times when she is despairing, and, you know, how can one person make a difference in all of this? There's so many bad things going on in the world. And I think that is the heart of spirituality, is that we may not be able to change the world, but there's something that calls forth for us to do something that can make a difference in one life, in one community, in one family, to make things better. And that is how resilience is forged.
Thank you all so much. What a rich and interesting conversation. So lucky to have had you all. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.